Good morning. I would like to welcome each of you back to the Johns Hopkins Hospital and the Department of Urology, where many of you trained and where the whole concept of medicine in the United States underwent a revolutionary type of phase. What was this? Well, it's really based upon the Quaker concept. As you know, Johns Hopkins was a Quaker, and so was William Penn, who formed the city of Philadelphia, and he believed that everybody was created equally, thus the city of brotherly love. And so it wasn't just the oldest son, and it wasn't from rich families, but everybody had a right to education. And here, everybody has the right to medical treatment. You came here and were trained. The concepts of residence started here. And so we welcome you back to this great pilgrimage of medicine at the Johns Hopkins Hospital. Now, what am I doing up here talking to you about? Is there something called spirituality? Well, a whole group of people think there is. Some people think there's very religious things. Some people are atheists. We have every conceivable thing that you can imagine. So what do you do when you're trying to figure out what to do with your life? Your father runs a service station. He doesn't own it. He runs it. And didn't finish high school, and neither did your mother, and you're dyslexic and having all sorts of problems. And we didn't even know about dyslexia in those days. And I'm in the hills of Tennessee, up in northeast Tennessee at Bristol, Tennessee. So what I did, I prayed, I meditated, I did all those things that people try to do. I got this overwhelming feeling that I should be working on cancer. I never knew anybody with cancer. I never even seen a doctor, to tell you the truth. I don't think I was in a doctor's office over twice in my whole life, and I was 50 years of age. So with that, what do? Well, I thought it was some noble sort of thought. I went to talk to my wife about it. We were married when she was awful young, 18. I was about 19. And we said, let's do it. So I went to work for a textile mill, North American Rayon Corporation, making tire cord in Bristol, in Elizabethton, Tennessee. And, of course, I'm not getting into any graduate school because I have one of the worst academic records you could imagine. And so the head of the research department, I'd come sort of the right-hand person for this gentleman, very dignified-looking gentleman, looked a lot like Bill Scott. He was in Buffalo, New York. His name was Lee R. Herndon. And he said, where are you going to graduate school? I said, the University of Tennessee. He said, no, you're not. And I didn't want to tell him I applied to 20 and got 20 rejections. They kept my $10, each one of them. And he said, you've got to go to my alma mater. He said, I got my PhD in chemistry with Ira Remsen at Johns Hopkins. Well, I didn't know what Johns Hopkins was. I didn't know, where is it? He says it's in Baltimore. I had no idea where Baltimore was. Sounded like Yankee country to me. And so that was the state of the thing. I said, well, what do I do? He says, you go up there and work your way in. You became the head chemist here. Go up there. They take care of you. When you hit the ball, they don't give a damn who you are. They let you play ball. And with that, I headed for Baltimore in 1957 with Westinghouse Corporation and became an engineer with them. And very quickly, the Russians fired up their satellite. In October of 57, I ended up on some of their engineering teams and was doing extremely well. But that didn't get me into Johns Hopkins. So as I've told this story, many of you heard it, I came up and I wanted to get into Johns Hopkins. Well, you know, I didn't do well, to say the least. I went to night school. And the next thing you know, I wasn't doing well there. So I volunteered to wash glassware, sweep the floors free, just to get in the door of the chemistry department. And I won't go through this, but it was in Ira Remsen's place. He was buried in the wall, and that really impressed me. So anyway, I got into that operation, and I saw a notice on the bulletin board one night on a cardboard. It says, the Johns Hopkins Brady Urological Institute is looking for a technician to work on 17 keto steroids in the urine of hypophosectomized patients with prostate cancer. Prostrate, that's what I thought this was the way you spelled it. I didn't know what a 17 keto steroid was or what but I headed down. Now my first error was I turned up the street here and got a ticket for turning the wrong way into Broadway. Dr. Tessar interviewed me, and then he said, I'd like to hire you. I had all this experience. I said, I can work at night. He said, it's a daytime job. I said, I'll work for nothing. When he checked me out, he finally let me come in and work. We're going to catch up on that story in a minute because that's my story, and I just wanted to get it out of the way because since then, as you know, I got the opportunity to be the chairman for a year of pharmacology. I never had a course in pharmacology. I helped found the Cancer Center with Al Owens in '73. We opened that after working together several years. And from there, I went on to run that in 87. I don't even have an MD. So with that background, this place has been wonderful to me, but the Brady Urological Institute has been absolutely fantastic. Now I'm going to turn over and we're going to race through all that as fast as we can, but I'm going to tell you there's magic in this pilgrimage here. And so let's get underway. I don't have to tell you that Osler in here and a lot of other people. So obviously I can't cover all that. We can't talk about the future because you can't talk about discoveries that haven't been made, but I'm going to try a little bit at the very end to do that. So first thing I want to tell you is, and this is a secret to the Brady Urological Institute, and then when we lose this, urology's in deep, deep trouble. And that is they always had a very close interaction with the basic science departments. And so back in this period, this is John Jacob Abel, the first man to crystallize a protein, and it was insulin. He crystallized the insulin, made the first crystals, did epinephrine, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he was from Michigan, and as you can see on here what he did. And so it was out of this department of pharmacology all over the world that basic science began to interact with urology. And where those things occurred, and it was a two-way street, great things happened. Where it became surgery, it was doomed just to do surgery. So let's get underway and take a look at this, because one of the first things that happens, he started this about the time that Hugh Hampton Young started his urology. And the first thing he developed is he made this drawing. This is his actual drawing. It's over on the 3rd floor of the Basic Science Building. He made the first artificial kidney. Now you have to think about when this was done. This is 1914. They're gas lights. The First World War hadn't started. Electricity just barely rolling. There's a little DC around, but mostly gas lights lighting up Johns Hopkins. And he said, oh, we'll have this cellophane-like material. Things will go through it. We'll put the blood through it, let the water go through it. And he said, do not call this an artificial kidney. Call it in vitro dialysis. And we have a movie of him giving a lecture on this. Of course, nobody calls it what he wants us to. They call it artificial kidney. And I don't have to tell you what that's done for mankind. But this was very important, and he really believed that you had to make journals. He was coming out of Europe. He started the Journal of Pharmacology and Experimental Therapeutics, and he was after Hugh Hampton Young, who was very young, to start a journal of urology. He said, we have to go with these big clinical journals because Germany and France and England are running the whole world of medicine, so it's time for us to have our own journals. And he pounded on Hugh Hampton Young until he said, oh, he thought that was a good idea. So in 1914, there is the artificial kidney. It is on the 3rd floor of the Basic Science Building. You should go over and look at it, including the crystals of insulin and epinephrine. I will not tell you what all he did. This man was absolutely out of sight. He was picked by John Jacob Abel to be on the editorial board of Journal Urology. There's no PhDs on the editorial board of Journal Urology. It went totally surgical, got rid of all the scientists of the hardcore type, and left the clinical scientist in place. We'll talk about that later. But here's the man who really kicked the thing off, and you can look down here and read these things and see how young he was when he started this. And so what Hugh Hampton Young did, he believed in science and in urology. And it's the science part of this that made all the day and night difference. Now, so the first person on the editorial board is John Jacob Abel. This is 1917. It's volume 1, page 1. And I want you to look at this first paper. A lot of people in here know about this. But this was the super science of the day. He did not start this journal with a lot of medical. He started with a lot of breakthroughs in science. Now, they cannot tell you how important this is. This has totally revolutionized medicine. We hardly ever work on animals and things. We work on cells now. And this was the first growing of cells out of the body. And so here it is. He's trying to tell us. Now, I'll yell a little bit so I can read this. This is what he said the Journal of Urology should be. And this is the preface to the journal. And this is by Hugh Hampton Young. It is therefore evident that some common meeting place is extremely desirable, some medium in which all types of papers upon the field of common interest may appear, archives of urology, historical, embryological, anatomical, biochemical, pharmacological, pathological, bacteriological. And many times I turned in papers to the Journal of Urology, and some of the top editors said, well, this is science, this is bio, we don't want that. This is exactly what he wanted. And this is what really shot us up front. such is what we hope to accomplish here. He wants to get all this work in. He wanted to raise research funds to be able to fund this type of work, and he wanted to put it all together. So he opens with one on the biggest breakthrough of the time, growing cells outside the body of human cells. Now, there's two things important about that, and here they are. Is number one is that this is called Studies of the Growth of Cells and Cultivation of Bladder and Prostatic Tumors Outside the Body. And this, I want to show you, had a Japanese on it, and it had some residents and fellows and things. Hugh Hampton Young's name did not appear on this paper. And Dr. Walsh and Dr. Parton and Dr. Scott and these people have carried that on. Most urology departments, you see the chairperson's name all over every paper, and they're the first ones to show the slides. We try to let the young people do that talking and show that for the first time around. So here it is. This is 44 years. 44 years these were grown before the HeLa cell was grown. Now the HeLa cell became immortal, so right away, Lynn and Howard Jones had gotten cells out of the uterus for HeLa, and that came 44 years later. This is a very famous book. You've seen it. It's made a lot of the top lists. It's a story of George Guy and how they grew these immortal cells. This is one of the biggest breakthroughs in all of science. Cancer cells do not age. Normal cells do. And you know, the telomeres, the telomerase, a lot of that on prostate coming out of the BRADY, but the real stuff came out of Harold Grider and the others here. And here's a picture. Where's Alan Parton? Alan, what do you know about seeing those cells look like that?
They're walking around.
That's right. So George Guy was the first man to take movie. Pathologists only look at dead cells. Alan Parton did his thesis, and he was filming these with Bill Isaacs in the laboratory. And these are metastatic cells that are crawling around. When they crawl around, they're going to kill you. Isn't that right, Alan? They put genes in there and made them crawl. So this is very, very important here. And they're suggested. Now, we've taken these cells and we have HeLa and PC3, and those are hard to come by. You cannot grow cells with prostate bladder. They're hard as hell. You think they grow easy. They don't. We tried and tried and tried, and here they did. But George Guy, who was one of the top scientists in the Department of Surgery, opened up the American Type Tissue Company, the Alton Jones Center with funds, private funds, and this put all of this on the map. But he really put the HeLa cell on the map from Henrietta Lack, and that's a new book you should look at. It really tells you what that's done for science. Now, the next thing that he did is in 1903, you remember he did the first radical prostatectomy, and that's also when Madame Curie made radium. And Hugh Hampton Young was right on top of every new breakthrough in the field. He just come back in 1917 at 40 years of age, going to the Army, going to France to serve. And of course, the big diseases in those days were syphilis and gonorrhea, and he put his heart and soul to that. We'll say a word about that in a moment. But here, he's going to use radium. And Alexander Graham Bell suggested they put radium in glass tubes and put it up against the tumors and things. And so here is 1917, First Journal of Urology. Here's the needles that he's sliding in to that. He had engineers in the laboratory making special equipment. He had a shop in the basement and chemistry on the top level. And here is his drawings of how to change the radiation and the field effects in the prostate, totally lost because the surgeons don't like to do anything they did in surgery. And even though this was one of the first breakthroughs in the field, it was totally ignored from 1917. He did 66 patients and said he thought it had a very beneficial effect. The second thing is Paul Ehrlich had used mercury and things like this to treat syphilis and gonorrhea. He came back and titrated cells he'd grown in culture, normal human cells versus bacteria, 240. He came up with this mercury compound, and this is mercurochrome. He gave it away. Now, let me just point that out. He gave that away. We'll say more about that later. And of course, the person who really revolutionized a lot of this was up at the University of Chicago. His name's Charles Huggins. This is Charles Huggins. This is Bill Scott in his early 30s. This is Clarence Hodges. This man built the greatest laboratory that's ever been built in the field of urology. The chairman of biochemistry at Harvard was trained there. The chairman of biochemistry at Hopkins, Al Leninger, was trained there. Paul Towley was trained there. RNA polymerase was discovered there. I will not go through what all came out of that laboratory. Everybody put their name on it. He did not put his name on these things. He was not the world's greatest surgeon, but he was certainly one of the world's greatest teachers and one of the world's greatest scientists. And so when Hugh Hampton Young left in 1945, he came to be the chairman, and the bottom line there was that the surgeons didn't like him, and he was pressured, and he went back after a few weeks, and Bill Scott had been made chairman at a very young age. He was an MD, PhD, who was studying concussion, and he was studying how blows to the head cause concussion. If you read those papers, they're right up to date. So anyway, here's Clarence Hodges, and these two men came to Hopkins, took his job. He went back after he'd come to Hopkins and re-accepted his job there. So he got the Nobel Prize in '66 for castration. He looked at acid phosphatase, and one of the first things that happened is acid phosphatase would drop. That was the first marker for the minute you got an infection, it would drop. And so at Hopkins, they took an ice tub, and this was up in the old Brady, and they put patients in ice water, and this brought the acid phosphatase back up again. This is one of the first heats, but the real heat came, and we're going to see here, at this time when in 1945, he came to be the head here. This is Bill Scott and some of the names of the great surgeons. This is all in the book he has written. But he brought with him Dr. Tessar, and Dr. Tessar was a chemist from the University of Columbia, and he came here to set up models of how to do this. And so this is when I came here. I am 78 years old. I'll be 79 very soon. I spent over 50 years of my life here. And when I got here, this was who was here. And this was the man, and his name's Horst Schirmer. Horst, just hold up your hand back there for those who don't know you. He was so far ahead of what actually is happening now that it was frightening. For instance, the biggest thing in the field of cancer today is metabolism. It's not just obesity, it's metabolism. And Otto Warburg recognized that the sugar metabolism was different in cancer cells. Today, when the Nobel laureate at Memorial Sloan Kettering leaves and they have to replace him, they replace him with a man not studying genes, with a man studying metabolism and sugar. And that is the new director of Memorial Sloan Kettering. Chi Dang here, who is the Dean of Research, is working on this same metabolism. It is the heart and soul of the cancer cell. And Dr. Walsh and others know a lot about obesity and metabolism. But this was Horst Schirmer, who had shaken Warburg apparatuses all over the Brady. I met him at night, and we stayed up there on cots, right, Horst? And shook these Warburgs on human tissue and showed that they had this. Then Horst left and went to Germany with the great Nobel laureate, Otto Warburg, and Otto Warburg introduced him to a new chemical he had for blocking sugar metabolism called 2-deoxyglucose. It is the only approved imaging agent today in 2011, and that's F2DG for looking at metastatic lesions. It's taken up by cancer cells differently, and Craig Thompson is the great authority on all this in Science and Nature papers up at New York at Memorial Sloan Kettering, and that has come. We put that into the first patient. Horst went over and spent some time with this great Otto Warburg, took time off out of his training to go do that, and came back with two things. One, metabolism and sugar, and two is heat. And this heat is going to be one of the biggest breakthroughs in the field ultimately, but I just show that to you. Well, there was tons of these people turned out by Bill Scott. You can see 22 of 35 went on. We could show the people who trained Dr. Walsh. Willard Goodwin understood the very importance of estrogens and some other things that were just coming down the pike. And he went out, and he was a wild man, but brilliant beyond belief. He was a professor at UCLA. Dr. Walsh studied with him out there and also with Joe Kaufman. But this is another man, and the people here know all about this in Northwestern, and we can just name these people on and on. Dr. Scott trained Dr. DeClercq, Jan DeClercq, and this is one of his residents, his son Neil DeClercq, and they decided that transplanting kidneys and transplanting human tissues was important. And over in South Africa, they set up this laboratory called the W.W. Scott Research Laboratory. He was a mentor of him, and this is the Scott Laboratory. And they sent over Jerry Murphy to open that up. They did over 700 primates and baboons. This is one of the all-time great transplant operations in the world. And then here's the first man to work in my laboratory in 1960. I had not gone to graduate school. So this man walked in the door. This man's a wild man. He's the most productive, hard-hitting guy I've ever seen in the field. What he came up with, LNCAP cells, he came up with PSMA, PSA. You say, oh, well, a lot of it. He's the man who powered it at Robert Roswell Park. He became the head of that. He found about 4 journals. Incredible man. Now, he was also a difficult person. Everybody in here knows that. But these are the type of people that they were turning out. He started the organ systems programs. I just won't go on for what all he did in that field. He passed away in his 60s, dropped dead over in Israel. But the real thing with these 2 men after Hugh Hampton Young, and if what I want to really show here, is these men did not set up businesses. They weren't patenting and selling licenses and things. They were giving away science and training young people to serve. If you had to give me one word for what these people did, it's what Ken Pienta just recently said. It was service above ego. Let me repeat that. Ken said that out at the big meeting we just had out at Homewood when he got one of the awards from the university. He says, this place pushes service above ego. And they weren't out trying to make money, form companies, you know, patent this, patent that. They were training residents and helping every patient get the best treatment in the world. And they were great teachers, and they were totally different. But this man back here, Diamond Jim Brady, gave the money to Hugh Hampton Young, started a lot of this, and it is philanthropy that drives the Brady. Let me repeat that. It's not companies, it's not going out there and doing this. It is philanthropy that drives this in the hands of these great leaders. And so these are 2 great men. He's the son of a preacher in Missouri, and his father ran, I think it was a cigar store in Cleveland, and these were people dedicated to hard work and really high quality things. And I cannot tell you that these are the people with Hugh Hampton Young that made this happen. So here I am now. I've gone in 1959, and I try to teach them how to wear good clothes here and things. But I want you to take a look at these people. You see a lot of people in there, Reiner Engel and Teslar and people in here. But this is when Dr. Walsh took over. And each of these people had a totally different surgical style, a totally different teaching style. But this is very, very important. It was at this moment, he's 34 years of age. These are very young men running this department. And they each had an incredible influence on this. And here's the man, one we most recently know. Most of the people here, a few know Scott. Nobody knew Hugh Hampton Young except what we read. And here's the man who came in and really thought about all sorts of new ways to make this a better field. And I cannot tell you, I'm not saying it because you're here, what he and Scott and Hugh Hampton Young did, but they set the style for real high quality urology. And you know, we don't have to tell you, he did this nerve sparing. Now, when he did this, I'm telling you, the number of people that told me he was dishonest and was making up the data on erection, I would go to the AUA and people said, Coffey, do you believe all that crap he's saying about erections and things? I mean, this is the way it always is. People always attack you if you make a major contribution. They do not want to accept. You only learn when somebody proves that you're wrong. And he revolutionized this in many, many ways. And here's some of the revolutions that went on. It's just a small part of that operation. But what he had done before he came here, he found that estrogens and androgens work together, especially 5-alpha reductase. He was with Gene Wilson at Southwestern. before he took the job here as the director. That combination of estrogens and androgens is still the biggest breakthrough, I think, in the field of BPH. And I think we now may have insight into what does that. And so here's some of the people. Craig Peters is here. He and Dr. Walsh treated some patients with BPH by changing their ability to be treated with TUR, and that was the #1 operation. This totally revolutionized things. But where's the estrogens and androgens here? Now, we never really got into that until Jay Crayford came along and started imprinting, and now we know it embryonically. This is all set up, the stem cells with estrogen. But what we did is we ran the biggest study in the world, over 200 dogs, beagles, purebreds, bred for this. This happens to be Bill Isaacs. We had up to 30 people sometimes in the operating room. Everybody was working on this thing. I can't list them all. The best review of this I've ever seen is when Dr. Walsh put together all of his thinking, I put together all mine in clinics in North America on BPH, which looks at stem cells, the growth of estrogens and all of this thing. But the person who really opened up how the estrogens and 5-alpha reductase worked was Evelyn Barrick, and it was totally ignored by most of us. What she showed was that when you add estrogens with 5-alpha reductase, the growth that Dr. Walsh and Dr. Wilson showed exploded was not an increase in growth, it was a decrease in the death rate. And this started the whole thinkings and different things on apoptosis by John Isaacs and others. And to this day, we still have not run this down completely. This is a great breakthrough on this. But the man who really came along, as you know, was this good guy who was a medical student. And what we were trying to do was we were trying to find out if there was a tissue matrix. This is what Tony Atala and these type of people are doing. Young Bill Isaacs had worked on his thesis looking at dog PSA, showing it was a serine protease. It does not clot the semen. The dog doesn't clot it. And he did his thesis, Bill Isaacs, on that. And he also did his thesis on the stems, on the growth of stem cells, trying to find biomatrix. This man came in, worked on this. Then when he became a resident, he hooked up with Dr. Walsh, and they did the nerve sparing. And I want to let you know this. When this was presented at the AUA the first time, the first person to present at the AUA, that is nerve sparing, with Dr. Walsh at his side, was this man who had done all the work. That's the secret of the Brady. And then in '74, I had already been to graduate school, came in '60 and got out in '64. Went into pharmacology at '65. At '73, I was the co-director of the Cancer Center. This was '74. Then Dr. Walsh made me a professor here and put me in charge of the labs. Dr. Tessar retired. And this is Mary Budell and myself in '74. This room on Brady 5 had this whole floor had been remodeled with philanthropy, and this is Dietish's old studio. So this is where Dietish, he had an artist on the floor. And I will not go through all this tumor biology of people and pathology and different things. We could go on for hours about these people. But the big thing is we discovered something very important. And what it was, it's the secret of the Brady. We say if this is true, what is it? Why? My wife had a pap smear. That was when I started work on cancer. How do you look at one cell and tell me it's cancer? So I go over and knock on Eggleston's door. He said, what do you want? I said, I don't know how you know a cancer cell when you see one. And he said, it looks like a cancer. I said, show me. And he said, I can't teach you pathology 101. I said, I'll teach you how to run an enzyme. We got a mouth fight. He turned on the scope. I didn't know he was not a cytopathologist, but a surgical pathologist. He put under the scope what a normal cell looked like, and it looked like that. And a cancer cell looked like that. And I said, what makes them look so variation in shape? He said, that's your damn job. So I walked over to Brady. I said, we're famous. I said, well, we're going to find out why they look like that. We're still working on that, nuclear matrix and everything, but that has a lot to do with this, is what heat's effect. Evelyn Barrick showed the inside of that was organized with RNA and sulfhydryls and all the receptors of estrogen, androgen, and that's tissue specific. and that became the matrix, and a lot of work that Alan Parton and this whole army of people did. Berezny was the first one to see this. And so now all these wonderful people poured through the Brady, and these are urology people who spent time. This is only small part of the list, but the first telomerase and telomeres, the first whole bunches of things on prostate started here. And here came a man who really changed things around. And he was imprinting and using hormones to make sex accessory tissue set with one injection when they were born. And he did the penis, remember that, Jake? And all these different things. This is a major, he went to UCLA and he did some of the real pioneering work on nitric oxide, and he'll speak later. But the real thing is Dr. Walsh decided we had to really put in reproduction. And so up on the floor, we hired a man from over in the basics, over in the School of Hygiene, named Tom Chang, and he brought over his technicians and people, and this guy named Don Vindovich, and Don's been the heart and soul of a lot of stuff I do and others do here. And this started it. He died, you know, of stroke, Tom did. But Tom really took a look at sperm. And I don't have to tell you that Peter Schlegel and others went up to Cornell, and they became, and we looked at the first organization of sperm DNA with Steve Ward and all this stuff. This was incredible breakthroughs in reproduction coming out of the Brady. Did vasectomies, ethanol in the vas, all this. But the man who walked in the door, who's a hard-working man, incredible effect. He heard one time Jake Rafer speaking on nitric oxide, and he can tell you this story. But this really began to turn things around. I never heard of erectile dysfunction, never heard it in my life. That's all I hear on NFL and NASCAR now. So anyway, this was the other thing that Dr. Walsh did. He wanted to build pediatric urology. I'd never heard of Bob Jeffs. I called my friends in Toronto. They said, in the prayer of hell, you're getting him down there. Well, Dr. Walsh brought him down here. And I won't go through all these people. This is one of the all-time greats. This is the man in charge now. I can't show all their pictures. DeSimo isn't on here, all sorts of people. But I just want to tell you that this has been an absolutely world leader in this field. And then in bladder and things, and in female urology, we're not going to go through all of it. He went off to Cambridge and got a PhD. As you know, his father and mother were great freedom fighters out of Poland. Got the Medal of Honor from Poland. He just died last week, his father. And here's just a few of the list of some of the things, explosion that was set off when it was possible to get prostate cancers, tissue, and cells. And so this is just a few of the names on here, and they're not complete by any means. But these are really world-renowned leaders in this area. This start the warm autopsy. Bill Nelson came in and worked. And so this is what really made the difference. Bringing in the top-rate pathologist, Dr. Walsh, got money to fund his professorship. We took care of these people. They worked in the Brady. Alan, you remember at night when he used to come down as a resident and do all these shapes and forms. And we won't go any further in this. The Marzo came and spent 2 years in our lab. These are really people in pathology who revolutionized this field. But the man I think knows more tumor biology than anybody I know in prostate is this John Isaacs, Bill's brother. John is, says it here, but what he did, he's the first man to really push apoptosis, one of the biggest things going in the field of cancer. And this is incredible what he's done. He's highly opinionated. He's full of himself. He's the opposite of Bill Isaacs. But this is one smart cookie, and he knows his tumor biology. And here's the other man who just blew me away, how he came in from up in New York at Cornell. And he came here, and I will not tell you, he changed the whole way I looked at that when he and Dr. Walsh did the work on following the longitudinal study of patients with PSA levels. And it was changing its velocity very early. Exactly what I didn't believe. And this has had tremendous impact. And I don't have to tell you about this man. He came in, and he's the man who got keratins and things. He worked in the Brady for 4 years on his PhD, had an incredible influence on us.
And with Bill Isaacs and with the Marzo, and with this, they did inflammatory diseases in the prostate. And then the big thing was we had this young man working in the Brady named Andy Feinberg. We sent him down with Vogelstein. They found methylation changes in the prostate. And this is probably going to win the Nobel Prize for somebody. Epigenetics totally changed genetics. This really came pouring up out of the Brady. And then this crazy man is an astronomer, wild as heck, named Drew Pardo, and he was Simon's. And they went down and they worked some with Bert Vogelstein and with Frey Marshall. They started making the first genetically engineered vaccines. And here is the FDA-approved first test in the year. And who was the PI on this? And these are the institutions. This was pioneered right smack out of here. And it really had an incredible effect. But nothing changed the Brady like when Dr. Walsh and Peg Walsh moved this over to the Marburg. Now, I don't have time to go in this, but Horst knows that Werner von Braun died in this room. We know that Jonathan Simon's father was the first man cured of cancer, leukemia, in this room at Hopkins. Clark Gable went over that rail. We could go on, and I won't tell you, but this is an incredible place. And they decided to move here. I thought that was stupid at the time and told him so. I couldn't have been further wrong. And here's the people who put this and designed it with the right style. And then he brought in a man who I thought he would never get here, the head of Walter Reed, the man who operated on the vice president of the United States. He came up to help get the job going at Bayview. We could go on, but this man sitting right here, Alan Parton, I cannot tell you what he did to make this possible. What Alan Parton did, he was into computers, he was into robots and all this. We were going to really make a jump at this. And there was no place for this man to work out there. He had no lab, no facility. We went out there, remember that, Alan? And talked to them about giving him a room. They gave him a room, and the bottom line was we had no equipment for him. Dr. Walsh gave us about $3,000. And Gerganis, you here? Hold up your hand wherever he is. Gerganis is here somewhere. So back here, Gerganis and Alan went down to the surplus, bought microscopes for $50, incubators for $20, OR lights for $30, and built a whole robot lab. And then the idea was to get some engineers in here, and they did, and we won't go any further. But this man had a tremendous effect coming down from Ralph Kleeman and that group. But this is the engineer who has made the difference. And the first man to go out there and mop the floors, hang the shades, clean the windows, and get rid of the cockroaches was Alan Parton. And I said, Alan, you have to be the man who puts robotic surgery in place. And do you remember what you said, Alan? You said, that is the field that Cavussi wants to do. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to help him get going. And we'll get the animal studies going, but that's going to be what he wants to do. And I just couldn't believe that he would step away from what I thought was a great future, which he did. And then here's the big one, is that Pat Walsh got familial cancer going, and in jumped Billy Isaacs, and I will tell you, the work this man did, he was the man to find the 8P loss, the 8Q gain, all the changes, all the familial studies. He really worked with Dr. Walsh. And here's the team that you see here of Sally Isaacs and Kathy and a whole slew of people with Walsh and them who ran down 29 institutions across the world and broke this whole thing open. Okay? He got an honorary doctorate degree. He got endowed chairs. But here's what I want to show you. When I came to Hopkins, there was no African Americans except in special clinics. There was no black graduate students, no postdocs, and all that got changed. And a lot of it got changed in the Brady. You know, Dr. Walsh won some awards for this. But I want to show you how bad bias is. Johns Hopkins opened up to make a place for African American women and children. No woman was admitted to the Johns Hopkins undergraduate. And the first woman class to graduate at Homewood is 1976, Sally Isaacs. Let me repeat this. Women were not allowed at Homewood as undergraduate students until 1976. So this is not just about intelligence, it's about lots of things. Here's the other man, as you know these things, he came up from Baylor, one of the smartest guys, did the oncolytic virus, is incredible. And so we're not going to go through this. I just want to tell you this man showed the telomeres are different, and that's going to be one of the biggest markers going now. And of course, Angelo DiMarzo on PIA and these other names you're well familiar of. Let me tell you what the next future is. The minute this becomes this, it starts moving around. Those are circulating tumor cells today, in the last year or so. That is going to be the #1 way to find cancer in practically all diseases, and it's blowing the field wide open. And some of the people who helped make this is the best translational researcher in the United States in all of cancer when he built this at Michigan. And they did all the DNA rearrangements and things. He's in charge of translational research for the University of Michigan. And he's the 37th most funded man in all of cancer in the United States from federal things. And I will not tell you that he did the proteomics, and he did the first complete model of a chromosome and TMPRSS2 and all this, and the big stuff coming down out of Michigan is all being headed by him. He just got the award here. This is back when they were students. And here's some of the funds we used to have with all these people. You can see who they are, just a few of them. But the long rifles and these people have had wonderful time showing us what we know. And here's the man who really changed a lot of things quietly and efficiently, and steps back and lets a lot of people take credit. I will tell you, he's one of the hardest working men I've ever seen in the Brady. He used to be there at 3 in the morning. I mean, geez, he almost killed himself doing this. But he's an MD, PhD. He came up with some engineering things when he was down at Mississippi. But what he came here to be a pediatrician and blew me away with his ability, when he never turned on a computer, to become an expert with the applied physics lab. He did Fourier analysis. He did all the mathematical expression of dancing cells and things, chaos, everything you can think of. This really, he put this together. And not only do we have to put basic science together here, we have to put all aspects of urology together. And that's what Alan has been doing. And I will tell you, the first tissue matrix with Getzenberg, the first proteomics with Alan, where BPH, benign, normal, and cancer from the same patient is run, not from cell cultures. The proteomic could identify these, and this is just amazing breakthroughs. And here we got all sorts of putting these big programs together at the statistical and pathology level. I'm not going to hit all these people. I'm going to tell you that for years and years, it's apparent that you've got to quantify the Gleason grade. Forget this stuff of looking through the microscope and say, well, that's 3 and 4, because when they die, there's nobody to replace them. You got to start over. And is this right, Veltri?
Yeah, I believe it is.
You got a mathematical expression now of the Gleason grade. This will change the whole game. And I don't have to tell you this, Elizabeth Platts is one of the all-time great epidemiologists. I've spent a lot of time, the best epidemiologist I've ever seen is Elizabeth Platts. And I will tell you the best statistician was Steve Piantadosi. And these brilliant young people are going to come charging down in all sorts of aspects and change this field. And they're going to talk in a minute. We're not going to say anything about what they're doing. You know who these people are. I will tell you, Dr. Walsh, do you remember this day when Money Menon came here trying to find some research to do, and you sort of pulled him out of the bushes and got him propped up enough to get in the residency program? But the thing that impressed me was Johnny Howard said, if you urinated in concrete, it wouldn't harden if you formed if you didn't form stones. If you did form stones, it would harden. Now, Johnny Howard was smart. He sent him over to work over with Dr. Leninger and that group, and I will tell you to this day why stones form in urine. Dr. Scott built a perfect artificial bladder with a pump that a dog could go over and raise its leg, and a magnetic pump would work. It was the most amazing artificial bladder in 1959. but it got stones all over it. We have to get into understanding the stone formation, understanding outcomes, and all this. And I would say right now, the best paper I've seen to come out of the Brady in the last year came out last week, and it's when this man's paper appeared on aptamers, which is RNA, which takes things specifically into cancer cells like prostate, and it carries the message that stops DNA repair. And that came out in the Journal of Clinical Investigation last week. And 20 big laboratories at MIT and Harvard are using his thesis discovery to ship things into cancer cells. And this man, I tell you, did work. He's one of the most quoted men. He did some of the early proteomic work. He worked with Lemley, and just out of sight. Well, we're not going to go any further. I got in the back. I'm just going to flash these up. These are a list without the names. You can read them as fast as I can. These animal models were sent all over the world by John Isaacs and others. The cell surface negative charge has been mapped. We're even able to separate these easily with Benson. Cancer in normal cells, this is going to all work on circulating tumor cells one day. This changed the whole field. We never looked at autopsy samples before. And Bill, Isaacs, and Bova got up in the middle of the night to do these. This is really dynamite. This started with some of the work that Jake Rayford did. It became apparent that we could imprint these babies. A lot of Meeker's work. Meeker now shows that the variation in telomeres on the end of the variation is important. A lot of Dr. Walsh, Bill Isaacs, and the team. Famous work by Nelson on GST pi. Proliferative inflammatory atrophy. A lot of what Veltry's doing and others has now been taken uptown and totally ignored by pathologists, totally ignored by urologists. It beats every time it's tested against pathology. It wins, doesn't it, Veltry? And yet, totally ignored. Think about what that did. And now RNA, only 2% of the DNA makes genes. It's this RNA that everybody, the young people here are doing and others. Right now, over in Hawaii, the big regenerating lab's held by Steve Ward, who's got the best work in the world on sperm DNA and how it's folded. we could go on and on. We can't stay here all day. But here it is. I thank you very much for allowing me to speak to you. I have been blessed by being here. Thank you very much.